Good afternoon everybody, it's Debbie Evans here, and yep, Rolo's actually with me this afternoon, and I'm going to read a bit more from his latest book, The Secret Adventures of Rolo, Book 5, Phoenix and the Dragonling. And this is a chapter all about the blacksmith. Here goes. Using my jewel collar, I transformed into dragon mode, waved goodbye to my companions and flew at once to Bottlesford, carrying the length of string. I landed on the kitchen windowsill of the forge cottage and peered inside. There were Bick and Bellows curled up on the floor in front of the range. I rapped on the glass, not giving any thought to my appearance in the middle of the night. I suspect I gave them quite a fright, turning up as a dragon. 2 pairs of sleepy eyes suddenly grew as round as tea plates, and I had their full attention. "Rolo, you've scared the living daylights out of us. What is this fancy dress?" Bick growled. "It will take too long to explain, but suffice to say, it's a handy method of transport," I said. "Wait there," hissed Bellows, and in the shake of a lamb's tail both pets appeared in the cold night air through the rather large Labrador-sized cat flap. Silently we manoeuvred the sliding door of the forge open, and Bellows exclaimed, "It's freezing in here." Bick assured her we would soon get the fire going and that would heat things up. But how? I glanced at the sleeping forge. The fire, which had burned busily all day, had been banked for the night and was covered with dust and clinker to shut down the heat. Just going to show you Chantal's picture so that you can see the forge. Bick warned us to mind the trip hazard of various anvils and presses. I was told that the pointy end of an anvil is called a bick. When I raised an eyebrow at the Labrador of the same name, Bellows told me that the dog had been born underneath an anvil. I wondered if the cat's name was something to do with wind, but didn't voice that thought. Bick shouted to Bellows to bring a shovel. The Labrador wielded a small rake and brush, and between them they cleared the spent coal from the barely warm fire. "We need a match," said Bick. A quick search of the workbench showed only an empty matchbox. Forge, cat and dog turned to stare at me expectantly, and I quickly cottoned on. Luckily I was still in dragon guise and obliged by puffing a little spark into the dying fire. "Neatly done," said Bellows. I blushed under my scaly exterior and decided to stay in dragon mode, as I would need to fly back home at the end of our task. I didn't know I could actually breathe fire. "Rolo, bring some kindling," Bick barked the order, and I obligingly gathered some small pieces of firewood neatly stacked in a box away from the fire pit. Bellows leapt up to the side with great agility, as only a cat can, and waited for Bick's instruction to pull on the handle just within reach. I watched the Labrador put his face near the pit and softly and rhythmically blow the embers until the spark I provided caught the kindling. He gently placed more coal on the fire and then gave Bellows the signal to pull the handle and work her namesake. The purpose of the bellows was to draw the fire and help it gather heat and then maintain the right temperature. "Not too much or you'll put the fire out," warned Bick. The cat pumped the handle less vigorously, and I watched in fascination as the fire grew, flames licking around the new coal. "Shouldn't take long to get the heat in this lot," said Bick, talking about the coal already in the pit, as he knew the fire had not been long shut down. The blacksmith had been working late into the evening on a commission. I glanced around the neat forge, taking in the racks of all kinds of implements, bins of metal bars, and a black anvil on which lay a crossed hammer and tongs. Part completed projects lay resting, waiting for the blacksmith to finish crafting her art and weaving her magic, bringing metal to life to her creative satisfaction. "Where does the name Blacksmith come from?" I wondered out loud. "Well, that's easy," said Bellows. "Smith comes from the Teutonic Old German word smethian, meaning to forge or shape metal using hammer and heat. The metal used was usually iron, which was blackened by fire, hence Blacksmith. Rolo, where's your measuring string? Ah, yes, right. Fetch me 3 long flat iron bars, over there. Bick pointed at a stack in the corner against the wall. He had decided the forge was now hot enough for the task in hand. No, not those, the wider ones, 4 inches by 1/4 of an inch. Luckily, I understood imperial measure, not just metric, unlike the floppy-haired boy. We laid the bars end to end on a clear area of floor, and amazingly they were roughly the same length as my string rule. That was a relief, as I wasn't sure my 4-legged blacksmith friends were up to resizing metal. As it was, I was intrigued to see how they were going to punch holes so we could bolt the tree support together, but I didn't like to ask in case they thought I lacked faith. Without so much as a backward glance, Bick picked up the first of the flat iron bars and selected a pair of tongs from the rack. He held the bar in the flame, keeping his eyes shielded with safety goggles. "Yellow hot," reminded Bello. "Don't burn the metal or you'll have to throw it away and start again." She'd also put on goggles to protect her eyes. Bick had his tongue between his teeth in concentration. When the end of the bar glowed red, he carried it to an anvil. I moved next to Bellows to see what happened next in the process. The cat selected a sharpened piece of metal called a punch and took it to the anvil. I noticed Bick was wearing a big, heavy leather apron and had put on a leather glove to steady the bar with his front paw. Bellows held the punch in place with tongs at the glowing end of the bar, and Bick shouted, "Ready?" and then brought the hammer down with a clean hit that indented a hole in the bar with a distinctive ringing sound of metal on metal. Back to the fire to repeat the heating process, he shouted, "Douse!" and Bello took the metal punch to the tray of water next to the fire and cooled it by dunking it before they started over again. So that's how you make a hole in metal, I thought to myself. I'd taken over the pumping of the handle to work the bellows, which were keeping the fire at just the right temperature. It occurred to me that I could probably just drag and breathe, but I didn't want to interrupt their working partnership and spoil the creative flow. "Quick, I must find the punched out piece," shouted Bellows as she jumped down and searched the floor for the knocked out hot circle of metal before it could ignite anything or burn our feet if we accidentally trod on it. I got the impression that these two were well versed in health and safety in the forge. This whole sequence was repeated quickly 5 more times until each of the 3 bars had a hole in either end. "How do we join the bars together?" I casually inquired, relieved of my bellowing duties by a nudge from Bick. It was rather hot by the fierce fire of the forge. Bellows nimbly sprang up on a workbench and selected 3 hand-forged iron bolts and showed them to me. "This you will have to construct in situ," as she tried the bolts for size in the newly made holes. They fitted perfectly. "Won't your mistress miss the bolts?" I asked, concerned she may have made them for a specific purpose. "Don't worry," Bick replied, "she has made plenty. A blacksmith is respected as the master of all craftsmen because they don't just make their own tools but also those for all other trades, and they make their own threading tools so they can fashion their own bolts." I was amazed. An old wooden box lying open on a nearby stool caught my eye. "What's in here?" I asked, and Bellows glanced over. "Letter punches for engraving," she replied. "Our mistress bought the box as a job lot in an auction. They are her pride and joy, as she thinks because of their great age they can tell a story. They're well worn through much use." "I'm taking a break," said Bick, removing his apron and glove. "Stay away from the forge," he added, as he slid the door open and went outside to cool down. Bellows was at my side. "Can you see if you can find me some letters?" I asked, casually adding R-O-L. The cat peered in the box and started rummaging amongst the old letters and numbers. "I can only find an O and an L. The R appears to be missing," she said. "How do you stamp the letters?" "Same principle as the hole punch," Bellows replied, "but quick before Bick comes back in. He might not approve of you signing the work." Bellows had quickly cottoned on to my intention. Without further ado, and aided by the cat, I lifted one of the bars back into the fire with the tongs, just as I'd seen Bick do. "Remember, yellow hot," whispered Bellows. I carefully carried the bar to the anvil, and she put on her goggles and picked up the letter L with tongs, and then lined it up in the middle of the bar, and I brought the hammer down firmly. A bit wobbly, but there was a distinctive imprint of a letter L. We did the same procedure with the O, placing one on either side of the L on one of those bars. The door slid open after the last ring of hammer on the metal. We jumped down guiltily and left the metal bar cooling with the letters OLO newly engraved. Bick didn't notice. "Right, you two, tidy up time," he barked. "Rolo, put the 3 bars and 3 bolts by the door. And then, Bellows, you bank the fire. I'll sweep the scale with my tail, and Rolo, you tidy the tools away. Everything must be just as we found it." "What is scale?" I asked, thinking of my dragon scales as I set to the task, gathering up tongs and hammer in my mouth and front claws. "Excess metal, the small specks that have flown off," said Bellows. "They could still be hot and start a fire, or they might stick in our paws and burn us." The flames had died down, the fire was banked, and we were about to leave the forge with our newly crafted metalwork when Bello hissed from a dark corner of the room, "Rolo, I've found the R." "What was that?" asked Bick. "I was just saying I've found the missing letter R from the box of alphabet stamps," Bello replied truthfully. It was a shame not to finish the job, but there was no time to do anything about it now. "Just leave it on the stool where our mistress will find it," instructed Bick. "Don't forget to cross the hammer and tongs," reminded Bello. "Why is that?" I asked. "To keep the dark arts away," both cat and dog replied in unison. Well now, that was something the floppy-head boy would be interested to hear. His beloved West Ham United football team, affectionately known as the Hammers, was originally a team of men employed at the ironworks in the East End of London, hence the cry from the terraces, "Come on, you irons!" I bet he didn't know the origin of the crossed hammers. The next morning the blacksmith was astonished to find the missing letter R from her alphabet box of letters. She'd lost it several years previously when it had flown out from the tongs during a hammer blow whilst she was inscribing a commissioned piece. Now it had mysteriously reappeared overnight and was lying on the stool beside the neatly swept forge. Forestry Commission staff were amazed to find a tree, which had appeared rather top-heavy of late, was now shored up and well supported by a metal frame made up of 3 strips of wrought iron, held together by what appeared to be hand-forged metal bolts. There was a very unusual inscription on one of the bands, which read OLO. Historians speculated that O might be a Roman numeral previously unknown, and that this was some kind of date, possibly indicating the age of the tree. And there we will leave it for this afternoon, and the sun has just come out again, and I'm going to try and upload these videos to YouTube, so as well as reading daily on Rolo's Facebook page live, hopefully you'll be able to catch any chapters on YouTube. More about that later, and I will see you tomorrow. Have a lovely afternoon. The sun's just come out.